Been a while.
Hello and welcome back to Project 380. Some long awaited parts have finally arrived, so today I'm going to be fitting the clutch and flywheel. So a lot of you have been asking what clutch and transmission I'm going to be running in this car, and there is method to my madness, but for now I am going to be running the stock transmission with an uprated clutch. But this is all part of a bigger picture which you may get to see later on. So to start things off, I first need to fit the flywheel, and this is the flywheel that I've had on the previous engine. This is years old, but it's only covered about 500 miles. There's a few heat marks in it, but it's still flat and fine to use. I've just made sure it's really clean. And of course, to go in the flywheel, I've got a brand new Koyo pilot bearing. It's a good idea to change these every time you've got the clutch or transmission off. And to keep the flywheel connected nicely to that crank, I've got a set of ARP high tensile bolts. These are 12-sided heads, so they can take a little bit more torque, and you won't slip the socket on the head of the bolt as much as you do with the standard ones. So the first step to installing the flywheel is to put that new pilot bearing in the centre of the flywheel. So before fitting the pilot bearing, we want to make sure this race of the flywheel where the pilot bearing sits is clean and free of grease. So this step is optional, but I like to use a very small amount of bearing retaining grease. This is going to help it secure into the flywheel and not rattle about anywhere. Then we're going to simply place the pilot bearing into the centre of the flywheel, and then using a bearing driver, the right size, we're going to slowly tap it in, making sure it stays square all the way down. So you want the pilot bearing to sit nice and flush with the flywheel. If you are using the ARP bolts to secure the flywheel to the engine, you've first got to check your flywheel. You need to make sure there is a radius or chamfered edge to the flywheel bolt holes. If not, the head of the bolts aren't going to sit flat up against the flywheel and won't be secure. So to prep the ARP bolts for the flywheel, we first need to put a little bit of ARP lubricant around the head and the shank of the bolt. And then just a little bit of Loctite 242 around the threads. So I'm now about to put the flywheel on the engine, and before I do that I want to make sure that the crank surface is nice and clean and the rear main seal is fresh and new. So now I need to torque those flywheel bolts down, and I need the flywheel to stay still while I'm doing that. A common way of doing this is to get a friend with a brake bar and a socket on the main crank bolt at the front, hold the engine still while you're torquing down the flywheel bolts. But you do risk over torquing the front crank bolt. So a safer way to do this is to use a flywheel locking tool, and this uses the bolts that connect the gearbox to the engine, and it sits in the teeth of the flywheel and stops the flywheel moving, so you can torque it down without over torquing anything else. So the standard flywheel bolts need to be torqued down to 73 foot-pound, but the ARP ones need to be torqued to 95 foot-pound. So I'm going to do that in two stages. I'm going to torque it down to 60 foot-pound with a smaller torque wrench, and then straight to 95 with a bigger torque wrench. So now to give that a good clean down with a bit of brake cleaner and a rag. So now with the flywheel all bolted up into the car, it's time for the clutch. And it has taken me a long time to decide which clutch I want to run in this car, because I am keeping with the standard transmission. I was torn between a twin disc clutch, as it's got less rotational mass, meaning I can rev up slightly quicker and it's got better holding capacity, or a pucked clutch, but there is the issue with drivability, whether they'll be able to hold the torque or the power that I may be making. So I've gone for neither of those. I've gone for the BOFI Racing Full Boost 385 billet clutch. And that's for a few reasons. It's got an almost OEM quality feel to the pedal, which means my leg isn't going to get sore if I'm sitting in traffic, and hopefully won't be as juddery as a pucked clutch. So this clutch can take 385 foot-pound at 500 horsepower, which is going to be more than my standard 6-speed transmission can take. So I've got no worries of this burning up or slipping. The pressure plate is billet, so I've got no worries of that cracking, and it's looking pretty heavy duty compared to the standard pressure plate. And for the clutch disc itself, this is a fully faced organic sprung clutch, so hopefully you're not going to get any of the juddering or the squealing from a ceramic puck clutch. And this comes with its own release bearing with a slightly different design, as the fingers on the pressure plate are slightly different. It feels pretty good quality as well.
Now for the BOFI Racing Full Boost clutch. First thing we're going to put in is the friction plate, and there is a sticker on it that says flywheel side, so make sure that is the right way around. And then for the pressure plate, make sure this is nice and clean before you put it on. And then for the 6 Allen screws that are supplied in the kit, I've put a tiny bit of blue Loctite on them first. So I've only just put those Allen bolts in a few threads just to start them off, because now we need to align the friction plate to the flywheel and the pressure plate, and to do that you need a clutch alignment tool which slides all the way in the pilot bearing and the splines of the friction plate. This simulates the input shaft of the gearbox, so pop that into the friction plate and into the pilot bearing and try and get it as central as you can. Now I'm going to go around the 6 bolts in a crisscross like pattern to slowly tighten the pressure plate down onto the flywheel. Then you can torque these down to 22 Newton meters in a cross like pattern. So all going well, it's now done and you can remove your alignment tool. Make sure it comes out and goes back in nice and easy, as that's going to make the gearbox fitting a little easier. And then we can remove the locking tool, and then the gearbox is ready to be fitted.
So that is the BOFI Racing Full Boost clutch fully installed, and I'm going to be fitting the transmission in a separate video, as there's quite a lot involved. If your predictions were right into what clutch I was going to install in my car, drop that down in the comments below. Also, if this video helped you install your clutch or helped you decide which clutch you're going to run, drop that down in the comments below as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time where hopefully I'll be fitting the transmission.